All right, thanks so much. My name's Collin. I also go by infosec on Twitter. My talk, as Collin said, is meta or non-technical tips for an infosec career. Because as Collin said, I think this is something people, when they see or hear about infosec careers, they think all technical, but the non-technical and the soft skills are just as important. So real quickly, who am I? My name's Collin, as I just said, at infosec. Just as a quick professional bio, currently I'm a security analyst. I focus in vulnerability assessment and penetration testing. Um, Fairly recent to that role, so pretty new to me there. Prior to that, I was a cybersecurity engineer by title, which essentially meant I was a generalist among a decent bit of things. And then before that, I spent a few years as a IAM or identity access management security engineer. And then prior to that, before I got into infosec, I was a system engineer, which basically system admin. And then before that, did junior sysadmin and help desk. Okay, so besides the professional stuff, hobbies and interests outside of IT or infosec, because that's important, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Really getting outdoors and hiking, enjoy that. Music, gaming, and various other things. Yeah, so I think it's good to kind of have other hobbies and show well-roundedness as a person, but we'll get into that in a little bit. And then social and contact info, got a link to my Twitter, my blog. Feel free to hit me up there if you want to. All right, so real quick, I wanted to kind of give a high-level intro to this talk. So what is it? It's a discussion on the importance of cultivating skills and a mindset to enhance your infosec experience. So I was kind of thinking back to things that I've noticed both in IT and infosec, is taking a look back, kind of hindsight's 2020, thinking what things I learned that would be helpful to approach work with a beneficial mindset, because the more you know earlier on, the better. Develop good habits early on, it'll set yourself up for success as you go on later. And I wanted to really encourage awareness going into the field and just mindfulness and intentionality of how you approach things, not just strictly from a technical standpoint. So as I briefly said earlier, this is just my personal observations, kind of looking back, kind of a had I known then what I know now. And a lot of these things are intuitive. A lot of these things aren't like groundbreaking new revelations. It's just things that I've felt personally were worth highlighting, and just wanted to present them to you as I found them to be beneficial in any kind of infosec related field. So kind of what might be most important may not always be what you think of or is focused on often, because when we think of infosec, we think of, hacking and coding and all the technical stuff, but there's more than that, especially in the business and enterprise world. So essentially, this is a suite of non-technical tips and advice to generally be more effective in infosec, regardless of focus. So this is just my brief thoughts on soft skills, mindset, workflow, and work-life balance. All right, so to continue this, what is it not? It's not an expert opinion or from someone who's got it all figured out. As I kind of hinted at earlier, I'm fairly new to the field, about 6 years in IT, a little over half that in infosec. So I'm not some 25-year expert thought leader. It's not a prescriptive or one-size-fits-all approach. I'll highlight that later at multiple points. And it's not really a roadmap for focus in a particular area. This is, again, supposed to be general for all of infosec, and a lot of it can be applied to IT and other stuff as well. It's also not a comprehensive list of skills guaranteeing success or landing a job. That being said, I feel like personally, if you follow these things, it will help you out tremendously, but it's not like a guarantee of you do this, you'll get a job. So bottom line, kind of, as I said, it's not prescriptive. So take from this what works for you. I'm just trying to provide my perspective that I don't think is always often talked about. All right, so kind of starting out, I want to just briefly talk about soft skills and why they're so important. I would submit that soft skills matter in a technical field, like especially information security, just as much as technical skills. And why do I say that? Well, security, I believe, is a people-focused field first and a technical field second. Yes, you need the technical stuff, but if you don't have the people around the technology, we all would not have jobs. So briefly, to kind of get meta or philosophical, hence the title of this talk, what is information security? Kind of the dumb dictionary kind of definition that I came up with personally is the practice or discipline of securing information or data. So if we think about that for a second, who creates information, who uses information, and who will be impacted if information insecurity causes some kind of event or incident? It really all comes down to people, because people create data, people use data, people gather intelligence, make decisions from data. Security affects people, and people are implementing the technology to do security and other stuff. So really, even in a very technical role, you will always have to interface with people. So just a little bit more on the nature of the job. The implication of InfoSec being a people-centric field is that communication is key. So kind of just briefly, what kind of communication happens in InfoSec and how often does communication happen in InfoSec? For those of you who are in the field or even in IT or development, something related, you'll definitely see what I'm saying here. But for those that aren't, you have meetings and more meetings and reports and tickets and client briefings and internal team and organization discussions. That's a lot of time, even for people that are in highly technical fields. So all that to say, communication is the nature of the beast in InfoSec. It's here to stay regardless of what field or focal area you're in. And that's why I think it's important. So because of that, that's why soft skills and communication are so important. And a reason that communication is so important in InfoSec is because a lot of your job, regardless of role, is kind of explaining the importance to people outside of InfoSec, trying to justify the importance of doing things and the value of security. So for example, not going to go in depth on these, but there's some fundamental things like justifying increasing security, trying to bring up potential items to track or focus on, budget consideration on new initiatives, training, products, changes or change control. Those are all fundamental things that most information security practitioners will run into, regardless of role. And then there's some more specific kind of InfoSec things, such as security findings. If you're in like an SOC kind of security monitoring role, or incident response, or if you're in a vulnerability assessment and pen test role, or forensics, or even like a regulation and policy, or what's kind of called GRC sometimes, you need to discuss your findings and why they matter. And sometimes you need to get buy-in or make sure that people are aware of things. So all this comes down to soft skills and communications, regardless of what technical role you're in. So just to highlight the importance of this again, our job is not solely to be technical practitioners, but to also evangelize the importance of data and security. You can be the most technical person, yes, subject matter expert in your field, and you still have to interface with clients 9 times out of 10 or team members. So you can't really get away from this. So as I kind of stated earlier, you want to show others why they should care. And really that means security is a two-way street. Others outside of information security need us to help them be secure, to build and harden things, set policies, check and enforce requirements, and more. And we also need others to care and work with us. Otherwise, you're fighting an uphill battle. So it really is a partnership. So real quick on the internals of communication. Effective internal communication leads to better work and more progress. A lot of this goes on in information security kind of internal team discussions. So general tips from my perspective to people when you're doing internal communications is to touch base as often as necessary and set expectations clearly, e.g., who's doing what, when they're doing it, and priorities of tasks. Make an effort to separate work and casual conversation if and when you need to get stuff done. And then kind of get to know your coworkers if you want. If you're not really the social type and you like to leave work at work, that's valid. But if you do kind of take that time to get to know your coworkers and talk outside of just shop, it can kind of establish some camaraderie, which is important. So external communication outside of a team is a staple, and it's not going anywhere. It's good to encourage discussion and dialogue from external parties. They need to hear from us in an approachable manner, and I cannot highlight that enough, that they always don't care about the technical side. We need, as practitioners, to bring it on their level. So it goes back to that two-way street, talk in a context that they understand and will care about. So usually, unless asked or otherwise appropriate, they don't care about heavy technical details. Keep it relevant to them. Then again, kind of going back to an earlier point, you'll be constantly explaining why you're doing, what you've done, etc. So it's important to highlight why it's important when it involves them and any actions or needs you need from them. All right, so beyond just communication, just general infosec survival skills. I wanted to talk briefly on documents and meetings, because I mentioned meetings and report writing would be a big thing in any kind of information security career. So you're gonna see this a lot, it's not uncommon. So what I would like to submit is that there's a high ROI or return on investment for getting good at these aspects of presenting and report writing. This will follow you your entire InfoSec career and probably generally even outside of InfoSec. So the more you practice and the better you get at it earlier, the more it'll pay dividends later. And this is always kind of a constant thing. So don't expect to be some presentation or report guru, right from the beginning. It's a continual practice. But practice may not make perfect, but it makes you more comfortable. So the other big point on this is be open to feedback and integrate it as necessary when you're doing presentations, documents, that kind of thing. So as I said, more meetings. So general advice for meetings. When presenting, err on the side of conciseness unless otherwise appropriate, like if it's a technical deep dive. People will always ask follow-up questions as necessary. So you want to make time for that. But however, you don't want to skimp on explaining the importance or relevance of an issue that you're meeting about. So in any meeting role, whether you're the presenter or attendee, don't be afraid to ask questions. This encourages dialogues. Other people may be wondering about the same thing or be able to help explain things in a way that you might not have heard. If something is out of scope or you're uncomfortable asking it in a meeting, make a note during the meeting and ask your team or your boss or whoever outside of the meeting, but it's good to follow up. So questions and uncertainties, this will happen a lot in InfoSec. One of my biggest pieces of advice would be to embrace the unknown. It's a constant part of InfoSec regardless of role or time in the field. The only dumb question is the one left unasked, I would say. Better to ask and know than not. Kind of there is no stupid questions kind of thing. And cannot emphasize this enough, be comfortable with saying, I don't know. It's normal. Everyone doesn't know everything. We all have our focal areas. And I can't tell you how many things that I learned being in the field for a number of years, coming to this talk, that I just didn't know. So it's normal. It's good because it establishes honesty and clearly where people are at. It's better to make your position known than let presumptions or assumptions be made. So real quick, going on, I don't know again, because I think this is very important. It's something that I wish I was better at starting out. Completely appropriate to say I don't know, but don't leave it at that. Especially in kind of a meeting or when you get an action item, it's best to follow up with, I don't know, but I'll track that down for you. It shows initiative or ownership or action versus like apathy or not caring, which is kind of intuitive, but it cannot be understated. Just as a reminder on that, be sure to actually follow up. Oftentimes you'll need to be able to hand off the item to someone else. So make that known to people that are concerned, in the meeting, whoever asks the question, if you have to hand off something, let them know that you had to do that. And it's important to own the issue until you're no longer required. And if you have to personally own an issue, be sure to kind of get help as needed, even though you have the issue. It's a good learning opportunity. If you need to own it to completion, don't be afraid to ask for help and get outside your comfort zone. So real quick on state of mind and kind of what I think helpful approaches and traits for InfoSec. Again, this is kind of high level and intuitive, but as I was thinking back on my few years, here's the things that I think would be good to know and set you apart. Drive and enthusiasm. It's a great trait in infosec, and I think most people don't get in this field really by accident, as far as it was intentional at some point. That being said, it's not always feeling it, and burnout is occasionally, it's fine. It happens to all of us. But infosec in general is not always an easy field, so loving what you do and being motivated does help. Along with that, just know that in infosec there's constant learning. It'll always require it regardless of role. So with that, know that no one is an expert and we're all in the same boat. Kind of be comforted in that. Also, again, don't be afraid to ask questions. You don't know what you don't know. Kind of going off state of mind again real quick, embrace the unknown. Infosec is full of it. Kind of going back to that theme of we don't know everything. My biggest advice personally, this is kind of my personal opinion, is dig into research first and work the problem. If you're still stuck, ask somebody, but be specific on what you've tried so they can better help you. There's a great link here, and I'll post the slides later, but there's a real quickly link to a blog here called You Must Try and Then You Must Ask. Basically saying, take an effort up front first, and then ask somebody and show what you've done. Because trying yourself first is really a great learning opportunity and experience. But if you're spinning your wheels, not getting anywhere, you need to seek outside help. This one is a lot easier said than done, but learn to love hard problems and failures. They're some of the best learning opportunities, when you mess up or you're stumped. That's at least personally when I've learned the most sometimes. And Casey or Varkar on Twitter posted a thread about this recently. Would highly encourage if you could dig it up or maybe post it in the chat to read that. Kind of people talking about their experiences when they've messed up and learned things. Understand that that's completely fine. It's only failure if you give up. Also, cannot understate, know when to take a step back. Sometimes a fresh perspective is needed. Banging your head on a problem just constantly is not going to help. It applies both personally when you own problems as well as handing off problems to others, because sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes you'll have stuff that goes outside of your scope and expertise, and that's normal. Real quick, want to talk about workflow. Finding a workflow that works for you. It'll make learning and work better. Not going to get too specific on this. I just want to encourage thoughtfulness and mindfulness getting into infosec, to spend some time figuring this out and front load it if possible, because it will pay dividends later. So cannot state this enough. Everyone is different. Find what works for you. Real quick on workflow, I would highly encourage take notes, even if you're not a fan of notes. Guarantee you almost everyone will need them, regardless if you have a great memory or not. It'll be referenced later for documentations, meetings by other team members, etc. The more organized your notes, the better. That is a practice. You'll get better at it. I'm not an organized person. I've kind of learned, and it's still evolving in the way that I approach notes and workflow, but definitely give that some thought. Some real quick tool suggestions on this: Microsoft OneNote, Joplin, Evernote, physical notebook. Again, use whatever works for you. There may be some constraints on your team and what they allow, but spend some time figuring that out. Organization is crucial. There's a lot going on in infosec, so being organized, staying on top of things is really helpful. Task tracking and to-do lists can help. Again, as I said, tools and methods may depend on your team. Follow the constraints, but within those constraints, optimize for you. Again, use what works for you, because everybody's different. My personal suggestions and some options that are out here. Kanban, I won't go into detail with that, but that's kind of a task tracking method. You can look that up. Planner or to-do list, whether that's online or physical. Calendar, again, online or physical. Ian Coldwater actually turned me onto this site called Workflowy. I don't use it personally, but it's there for kind of an online to-do list, if you like that. Find a time management sweet spot. Really, this is open-ended. Find what works for you. Again, use a calendar if that helps you. Pomodoro technique. Again, just manage your time well, because you will get busy. Use tools to increase efficiency as needed or if needed. Things like alias, auto hotkey, copy pastes, document templates or wikis, things that'll save time, will give you more time and help you better optimize your workflow and manage your time. So again, you'll stay super busy, so minimize distractions if or when needed. IMs, emails, notifications, whatever, as it fits your situation. And kind of off of that, reminders can be a lifesaver. I live off like Outlook reminders that pop up, or otherwise I'd forget. And one of the last points I want to make is the importance of work-life balance and information security. Yes, you do need it. It's healthy, and no one can go 24/7. I know we all love infosec, and a lot of people that are really eager to start out are really hungry and passionate to learn. That's fantastic. That's awesome. But I will say pace yourself, because you don't want to burn out. InfoSec in general is challenging, mentally exhausting, so take some time to have some balance. The level of this may fluctuate. That's okay and normal. If you're studying for a cert, you may be busier out of hours, outside of work hours, but when you have the time, take time for yourself. I would suggest highly that you set healthy routines. Working well does not equal more time working. When you can, leave work at work and make time for sleep, family, other hobbies. I would say in general, just don't pressure yourself. The work will always be there. Again, this fluctuates, but in general, especially if you're planning on staying in information security long term, and if you're young, like you've got years ahead of you, so you pace yourself and just strive to keep that balance. My personal recommendation is find other hobbies, bonus points if some of them are away from a screen. I love gaming personally. I know a lot of other people do too, but I think it is healthy to find some other stuff outside of a screen. The mind needs rest or diversions. Work isn't the only thing, and work can be very mentally exhausting. And I would say the more you kind of rest your mind and do other hobbies outside of InfoSec in your career, your focus at work is better, especially when your time on work or in work is finite. And as we all know, kind of the common phrase, work to live, not live to work. InfoSec is still just a job, even if you do love the field, and it's awesome that you do love your job. I love my job and I love the field. But again, there's other things in life. So what's important to you? Make time for that, whether that's family, personal health, hobbies. Those things I would submit are just as important as work itself. So kind of in summary, I would submit that InfoSec is a people-focused field, making soft skills communication important. Soft skills and mindset will follow you throughout your career, regardless of your focal area or how technical you get. So kind of find what works for you and use that. Mindset and approach is one of the biggest factors in success for this field, I think. So really know when to ask questions. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know. Embrace challenges. You will come through a lot of those. Just kind of really be intentional about how you approach things, I would recommend. Spend some time figuring out a good workflow for you. This, again, I know I breezed over it because there's a million different tools. You'll need to find what works for you, but when you can, spend a chunk of time figuring this out, especially when you start in a new role or a new organization. This will pay dividends later, because the farther you get in your career, generally the more busy you will be. And you will wish you had done this earlier if you did not. Then finally, maintain a healthy work-life balance to keep your sanity. Find what else you enjoy too. So that's kind of my spiel on kind of non-technical tips for an InfoSec career, and kind of set yourself up for success in information security. Want to open the floor for any questions. If we don't have time during this talk too, feel free to contact me. And I also want to thank you for listening and thank the InfoSecCon staff. So do we have any questions?
Let me hop in here. That was so good. I really liked a lot of what you were talking about. I think it's incredibly valuable for people to learn this early, and even for us who are in InfoSec already to remember these things, because often we are not pacing ourselves, and we're not, following these practices that really are helpful. And when we do, they make our lives a whole lot better.
Yeah, it's a
Uh,
continual process for sure.
right? So let's see here. Scrolling down into the Discord. So, one of the things that was brought up, and you kind of covered it, was how to avoid burnout. And how do we not just dive too far into something and burn ourselves out on it?
Yeah, again, I hate to keep saying it's kind of a personal thing and find what works for you, but it really is. Situations, stage of life where you're at in your career, that'll fluctuate, just know that. Like, for example, I'm studying for a cert right now, so I have less free time than otherwise. But when you do have that free time and you not pursuing a cert, or you don't have, busy time at work, take time for yourself. When you can leave work at work, that's awesome. Don't feel bad or lazy about, whenever you're clocked in, clocked out, being done, and just chilling with family, kids, playing video games, whatever you like to do for fun. And just long term, I guess, just try to maintain a balance, because there will be busier parts and there will be less busy parts. Enjoy and take advantage of the less busy times without feeling guilty.
Yeah, definitely. I echo that 100%. It is waves, sometimes you've got to go really hard and study for a cert, and other times you get to step back and, start a new Skyrim character and disappear.
Yeah, but if you're
um,
if you're trying to stay in the career long term, you really are playing the long game. So just kind of think long term.
exactly. Comparing it more to a marathon than a sprint. You've got
Exactly.
Yeah. You don't wanna burn out in the first 10 minutes of the race. You got to make it to the finish line. And I think that's something we all have to keep in mind, is, and not being, I think there's a lot of pressure being on social media and that sort of things, to look at people who you might see as smarter than you, and like, oh man, I need to catch up. Don't feel like you have to catch up. Take it at
Yep.
your own pace.
Exactly. Yep.
Um, yeah, I think that's so important, because I think that probably contributes to a bit of these burnouts and these people who feel like they're not where they should be.
Yep. I completely agree, and glad you brought that up. I kind of say that really you should. It's much easier said than done, but you should be focusing on comparing yourself to only yourself. Are you better than you were before? Are you making forward progress? But don't put too much pressure on yourself, because some of those other people that you're seeing snapshots from Twitter or whatever, you're seeing all their best moments a lot of times. You don't see the whole picture. So just focus on you and how are you versus where you were before.
So we have a question from Discord. Do you have a preferred note-taking technique, such as bullet journaling or a preferred daily organizer style?
It really depends on what I'm doing. I really couldn't get used to bullet journaling personally. For note taking, if I'm in Linux and taking notes about tasks, I personally use Joplin. If I'm taking notes about other general stuff outside of like a VM or something, I use Microsoft OneNote because I use Windows as my host. Um, Organization really just depends on what I'm doing. I will say I try to keep as organized as possible. Both Joplin and OneNote have like sub notebook and page and tab kind of functionalities. I make good use of that. Generally, I personally kind of follow an outline approach. Um, Provide enough detail where I can search back through it and just keep it organized where it's not a huge mess, but don't go overly wordy. That's my approach. Again, for the 15th time, do what works for you, but spend some time, if you haven't taken a lot of notes, figuring out what suits you well. And that may change in different roles.
Yeah, definitely. I think that just finding what works for you is important, but it can help looking at other people's note styles to kind of figure out maybe what could increase your efficiency with note taking.
Very
Um, yeah. We have two questions that kind of go hand in hand here. So we have someone who, they have time to dive into infosec stuff in the summer and they don't know where do they begin, but and to add on to that, how do they avoid a rabbit hole of diving into everything? Can you speak from experience for yourself?
Yeah, that's kind of a tough one to answer. I mean, I can speak to my personal experience, but I think
Yeah.
I somewhat got lucky in that I kind of had an idea of what I wanted to do. I will say starting out, you never know what a field's really like, especially, what you see or hear about, and then the actual reality of getting into the job. But I knew kind of early on that eventually I wanted to be kind of in a pen testing or offensive security role, at least for a bit. So I kind of angled my trajectory there, but I was very intentional not to try to rush it too much and to kind of spend some time getting background information and general context of like systems and OS and networking before rushing into something specific. So high level, I would suggest, if you think you know what might interest you, research that a bit and see if it really might. And if it will, go down that path for a bit. If you find out more later that you hate it, you can always move to something else. There's plenty of stuff. If you're really not sure yet, I would suggest getting kind of a good fundamental knowledge, if you don't have it, of like operating systems, how they work, kind of some internals, not really deep dive, but just comfortable intermediate knowledge, a little bit of networking too. I think regardless of what kind of role you're on, especially if you're in a technical role, that will help you. And then I guess to general security theory, the non-technical stuff, any role will use that, whether you're compliance or pen testing or whatever.